For fellow art rebels who want to imagine new worlds, Revolution Art Society is a monthly newsletter and podcast that dives deep into the ideas, experiences, and people inhabiting the cracks in the establishment. Join artist and mother Maya Mackrandilal as she explores enticing new ways of looking at the world and engages in conversations with creators of all kinds. Welcome back to Revolution Art Society. As always, I am honored by your time, your attention. I'm joined today by my dear friend Enid Munoz for a conversation about the transition to motherhood, a powerful portal of transformation that we are both still in the process of alchemizing. But before we get into that, I want to introduce Enid. Enid is a human currently crossing the bridge between who she was and who she is. She is currently learning about her new self, collaborating with Enid Munoz, artist, on creating picture books, supporting Swarm Artist Residency 2024 coordination, stewarding a child into this society, balancing relationships, and working in administration. And if you don't mind, I would actually love to hear a little bit about your collaboration with Mitzi, who's your sister, on this, these storybooks.
I'm really excited. First, this is so cool. Mitzi and I feel like we have always kind of been like, oh yeah, we'll work on something together. She's a visual artist. She does a lot of chalk art. She does it for venues and restaurants and things like that. But really, since she was young in her bedroom, she would write, like, stencil out words and things like that on the walls of things. And she's been really growing and honing that skill. She's been learning from other people. And I feel like she's at a place where she is more confident in it, which is really exciting. This last year or two, since having Leo, I've been trying to figure out what my capacity is for art and what I can do with all the new things that I have, responsibilities that I have. So writing is something I've been focusing on. And I have two fun little books that I have written so far. I reached out to Mitzi and said, hey, do you want to actually do this for real now? So it took us a little bit, but we are doing meetings every 2 weeks to talk about it. And she has drafts, and it's been really great because I feel like we're growing together more confidently in this. And it's just really, really sweet to work on something with my sister. So yeah, I'm really excited about those.
I cannot wait to purchase these books whenever they become available. So I will keep the Revolution Art Society community updated on when that happens, because I think that's going to be great. I can't wait to see what you two create. And also Swarm, that's awesome that you're working on that. You know, I still remember very fondly in my very short time, you know, when I got to go, and it was just so beautiful. Such a great community.
Yeah, that residency is really special. I feel like over the years, it's become even more open, and the diversity that is intentionally invited and participates in the residencies is so incredible. It's become, whenever I get to go, I feel like it's the little world we wish we had.
Yeah.
It's just so magical, and there's so many different lifestyles and expressions and identities that you learn from each other, and it's all just magical, and it's great. I feel like what it's come to be is really something special. So I'm really excited to work with them on it again.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Maybe one day I'll be able to figure out how to go back and experience
Yeah.
that again. Because, yeah, like you said, it did feel like magical, you know. So transitioning to our conversation, I think when I reached out to you, I said that I was looking at some photos of myself from that time, and I said to Sean, like, why do I look so happy in these photos? And he was like, you seemed happy. And I was like, I was not, like, this photo does not like even in the moment that the photo was taken, I feel like it does not capture how I was feeling. And I think another thing that happens, and I don't know if you've experienced this, is I feel like my brain is slowly editing what that time was like. So I am forgetting in a way, like what I was
Yeah.
going through. And I also feel like this portion of motherhood is not really portrayed in media. When I was going through, pregnancy, I went to the childbirth class. They talk about how childbirth is really misrepresented in the media because they need to create drama. So they always choose the most dramatic way of like childbirth happening and that it doesn't have to happen that way. But at least it's being represented because I feel like this
Yeah.
is like not being represented at all. And the closest thing, Sean and I, especially during that time, started just like binge breastfeed, like, it was like binge breastfeeding the whole time. So we were like binge watching TV at the suggestion of my lactation consultant. She was just like, for the next 10 weeks, just find something to watch, just sit there and just give up all intentions that you're going to do anything else but breastfeed. And so over that time and afterwards, I noticed two representations that I saw in media of this time. One was an episode of House, and just trigger warning for people like this, I'm about to mention like severe mental health and violence, but this in the episode of House, it was a woman who had postpartum psychosis and drowned her
Mm.
baby.
Oh,
And then
oh
so that's like one representation.
my God. Okay.
I know. And so imagine watching that while you're like holding like
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
and then the second representation was The Good Fight, which is a spin-off of The Good Wife. And there's a character on there and she gets pregnant and she's a lawyer. And so she tells the law firm, like, I'm going to take 1 month off and then I'm back. And Sean was like, no, like, what do you and then that was it. They never revisited that idea of like only taking a month off.
Oh man.
And the only time they revisited her negotiating having this baby was an episode where someone was basically telling her that if she wanted to get this promotion, she had to be there more. And she was trying to decide, do I, give up time with my baby? And ultimately she was like, okay, yeah, I'll just do that. And I was just like, what?
Ah,
I just felt like the writers clearly just had no concept of what they were talking about. And so I just wanted to open up this space to really talk openly about like what was it that we experienced, knowing that our memories are already changing, like who we are has changed. And so even this will not necessarily, I think that this conversation would have been very different if we had it in the moment, but then our capacity
mhm.
was totally different at that time.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, maybe just if you want to start by just kind of sharing what that time was like for you, and just for people who don't know, I think we're going to try to stay with the fourth trimester, which is really kind of the first 3 months after the baby is born.
Yeah. I just wanted to build on that. I do think if we would have had it while we were in it, it would be different, a different conversation. But I also, this time of being able to kind of look back and reflect on everything is like gives me a whole different scope on what it was and how it felt. For me, I'll go into going back to work in a little bit because I want to say a lot about that. But for me, I think the biggest thing is I did not anticipate all of the hormonal changes that happen in the fourth trimester. So, in pregnancy, it's very like almost like a stereotype comedic thing of all the hormones that woman is going through, and she's crying and she's bawling and blah, blah, blah. So I knew about all of that was going to happen during pregnancy. But afterwards, for me, while my hormones were changing again to accommodate breastfeeding and changing again to accommodate my body changing, it's like compressing and or maybe actually like contracting more and healing. And then after that period, then my hormones changing to start balancing out to myself. For me, all of those changes in the beginning while I was breastfeeding all that stuff really just killed, shut off my level of love for others and also my like sexual being. And I was not expecting that at all. And it was during that time, once it started affecting my relationship with my partner. And then after, when I was starting to get kind of like a little bit of feeling back, I realized how much part of my identity, my sexual being, it was and is. And so I felt like I lost a part of myself. I felt like I wasn't me. And I was frustrated with it. I was like, when am I going to come back? Like,
Mm,
when am I going to be me again? So that was really difficult. I'm very fortunate that I have a partner who does not pressure me to do things I don't want to do. So this whole time we're like not really doing anything. And he's like, I'm also still a person that like his hormones are the same. He still has those needs at the same capacity that your level that he had. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to. I don't really care about you right now. You know what I mean? And it's just the level, like I didn't care about him. I like Julian, I didn't care about him. I didn't care about our dog. I don't remember if I mentioned this to you, but if my dog were to have, he got sick like 2 days after Lil was born.
oh, wow.
And he went to the ER. He was there for a few days, little vet ER.
Yeah.
He was there for a few days. We weren't sure if he was going to make it, and I was totally fine with that.
Oh
I
my
was even like a little relieved. I was like, well, it's one less thing I have to take care of. So,
God.
which is terrible because I love him. Like when we moved to Hawaii, we brought him with us. And like to the day, we are not going to, he's was our like first child in a way.
Hmm.
And so for me to be like, I just don't care. Like, what a relief. That was a shock.
Hmm.
Um, and because I have always been this body type for most of my life, give or take. I did not recognize myself either in the body that I had. I didn't, when I looked in the mirror, it wasn't me. I didn't
Mm,
feel connected to my body. I didn't, like, I had a really hard time looking at myself, even if it wasn't in a reflection. So I also had like body dysmorphia.
mm,
Um, so and all of these things we don't talk about.
hmm.
All of these things are just, I had no idea I was going to experience that. And I wasn't prepared for, and Julian wasn't prepared for. It was hard. It was hard. And it wasn't until a year postpartum that I felt like I was a version of me again, that
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
coming back.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. And I was working a corporate job. I only had a month and a half off
Hmm.
for leave, for maternal leave. So I was working a corporate job then that I was struggling with. So I was working a lot of hours. I was working off the clock, which is
Mm,
illegal. Um, and it was the only way I could keep up.
hmm.
Uh, and I felt like if I didn't, I was going to get in trouble.
Hmm.
So I felt like I didn't have a choice. So it was also a time when I was struggling with, do I potentially lose my job and not keep up, or do I forfeit my time with Leo after work
Hmm.
and have Julian pick up more care for him, and that and or log in once everyone's sleeping and keep working.
Mm, hmm.
And I'm sleeping even less than what I
Yeah.
am already on top of an infant, like
Yeah.
infant night times. So it was really, really difficult. So when we talked about, when you mentioned media just kind of brushing off that one character was like, oh,
Yeah.
just take a month off. I'm like, oh my God, that is not enough time.
Yeah.
A month and a half was not enough. And that was the other thing I wanted to say. Sorry, I'll stop talking after this.
No, no, keep
Um,
going.
the other thing with going back to work so quickly, I didn't know how obsessed my brain was going to be
Mhm.
with the baby.
Mhm.
So I've heard stories about mothers going back to work and they have a hard time. It's like they cry and stuff like that. I didn't cry. I felt torn about it. I felt conflicted about it. It wasn't like it didn't feel great, but I logically understood why this was happening, and I could not focus on anything else but
Mhm.
him. Like I
Mhm.
was in the office, I wasn't home, I was in the office. There wasn't anything around me that would make me think of him. I just could not stop thinking about
Mhm.
him.
Mhm.
And when we had to get him into daycare, daycare allows you to, well, they have the app and they put pictures of your child on
Mhm.
there throughout the day of the activities they do. And when they told me that when we first signed him up, I verbally told them, I don't want that. I don't want
Mhm.
to look at that because
Mhm.
I knew that if I looked at it, it was going to hurt.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, you don't have to look, don't open the app. And I was like, okay. But then I think that same day that he started, I looked and
Mhm.
it became a thing that maybe every like 20 minutes,
Mhm.
I would open the app to look at him, even if there
Mhm.
weren't new pictures.
Mhm.
Um, so it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. 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 Oh, my heart just like hurts so much, hearing that. And I think that that's like something I think people really need to understand is what you're experiencing or we're experiencing, that's your body. Like that's the truth, Like the truth is you needed to be close to him. Regardless of what this overculture says people are supposed to do, that is the truth, right? Is that at that point, there was no differentiation for him between him and you, right? Like you are a part of him.
Mhm.
And what you were feeling, like in a way, even though it was really painful, was so important because that meant that you were feeling that separation too. And so that meant that like that connection is still there. When we get to like the next part of this conversation, where I really want to talk about like what would a just society look like that actually centered the needs of babies, of the people who give birth to them. Obviously, sending somebody back to work, a
Yeah,
month, 2 months, 3 months, like it's not enough time,
it's not.
and it's not, and so like that's the deep ancestral knowledge of our bodies that tells us it's not, but then also actual research and science also tells us that 3 months is not enough. And again, I kind of want to push this to the side and kind of focus just on like our experiences first before we get into like the critique. That's also a reason I wanted to talk to you because it is so common. There is no legal amount of time that people who give birth get to recover to be with their child in this country. And then for me who got actually a little bit more than 3 months, I worked from home. And so after my maternity leave was over, I only worked part-time for that first month that I was back. And I was very fortunate that my direct supervisor was like a mother of two. I think our executive director is like a mother of three. So I definitely was in this space of a lot of understanding of what I was going through, but still the expectation, right? Like we understand
Yeah.
what you're going through, but also you still have to do it,
Yeah.
like so like it's like where's the revolution, right? Because it's not happening
Right.
if like you understand that it's difficult, but we're still going to do it anyways. Even the people who are lucky, right, and have like 3 months of maternity leave, it's treated as this great thing that's been bestowed on you, and it's not enough. I like how I
Yeah.
described it was that I felt like I was drowning every single day. And then as soon as there were like moments in my day where I felt like a little bit of happiness or like a little bit of like enjoyment of my time with my son, immediately It's like, okay, now go back to work. So then all of that,
Yeah.
like, like that went away, right? Because now every single day I'm trying because and I'm working from home. So honestly, for me, it's like, what's more important, like this email or the fact that my baby is crying and needs to be nursed? And, I'm
Yes.
going to choose that thing. And so,
Yes.
I had kind of a similar thing where it's 8 o'clock at night. So like, let's try to catch up on some work. Or, and sometimes I still have to do that because I'm still working from home. And like, occasionally he does have a tough day where maybe I
Mhm.
have to hold him to sleep because he contact naps um and
Mhm.
so then it's like, okay, well, I have to kind of make up something to, catch up. Yeah, I came back to work with like a lot of, if I'm being honest, like a lot of anger towards the
Yeah.
expectation, that and I think on top of that, the realization that the level that I had been operating at before work was already unsustainable. So then trying to have me come back in and try to keep this program going was an expectation that was not did not feel good. Like the whole the whole
Yeah.
thing just like did not was not a good experience. Rewinding to like especially those first 3 months. I know this is something I think I told you in a previous conversation that I realized that sleep deprivation was like a huge trigger for my depression, which I it's so funny, like I just never realized. But looking back, going through therapy and doing all this work, I realized that I had, a lot of sleep issues. And then couple years before I gave birth, I my sleep had actually improved a lot. And so like my mental health had improved a lot. And I didn't realize the like causational relationship between those two things. I just
Mm.
thought like, oh, well, I'm feeling better, so I'm sleeping better. I didn't realize that there was like this cycle that had been established in my body, and that then suddenly being thrown because like you don't sleep super well when you're pregnant because it's like uncomfortable, but it's not the same thing as cluster feeding at like 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. It's not the same thing at all. And luckily I already had like the support system of like my therapist in place, so I didn't um I'd actually told my therapist like, oh, let's like take a break because I'm going to be so busy. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to like meet with you. And Sean, a couple days after we were home, was like, you need to talk to your therapist, like, because I was definitely, I was really struggling.
Yeah.
And and so I did, and I think it did help a lot to have her there to just validate, to offer like that validation of my feelings. And this is something else that I wanted to mention, kind of listening to you, was all the things that you weren't prepared for. Another thing that I found really interesting was as soon as I like, it's like when I had the baby and I started kind of maybe saying some things to people about how I was struggling, it's like then you get like all of the stories, right? Like I went
Yes.
in, I think so I had like a complication with during my birth where my placenta got stuck. And so I usually go in, I think, at 6 weeks, but I had to go in a little earlier. I had to go in twice to see my OB. And so the first time I went back was maybe like 2 or 3 weeks in. And she was like, oh, yeah, like I used to just like take a shower and cry every day because she had like two kids. And she's like, yeah, I used to take a shower and just cry like every day. Like, no one's like saying that to you
Casual.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like another friend, had this like horror story of having like food poisoning and breastfeeding at the same time. So it's like, you've been like initiated into this space, and that's when like the stories come. And so I think that was another. And I had watched a YouTube video where someone, I don't know how she managed to do this, like made a video of like like my life like postpartum and like she
I
like
don't know how they
had
do that.
yeah, I don't know. And I remember watching it, but it was like I could not process what she was saying when she was like, "Yeah, so I sleep from like 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. so that like my husband like takes care of the baby before he starts work." And I was like, "What?" I just feel like there just needs to be more discussion of this time. And
Mm,
also our society's like structures are part of what makes it so impossible
yes.
on parents. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Um, yeah, I watched those same videos to while I was pregnant to kind of prepare myself on what it would could be like. I was curious on how sleep was actually like because everyone says, oh, once you have a baby, you don't never sleep. So I started watching those to see kind of like, okay, how much am I actually going to sleep? And I couldn't really understand it. Yeah, a lot of them are like, yeah, basically they wake up for 2 hours at a time, multiple times at night. And even watching them, I was like, but how much does she sleep? Like, but what's, how often are they waking up? And I think part of my brain also was like, if I try to actually understand, I will break down. So let me just not.
Yeah.
I think there was also a protective measure there. Like there's no going back. It's happening. So I might as well just figure it out as I go. I think while you were talking, I remember the other big thing that I absolutely was not prepared for is how much I was going to share my body after pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the level of how much I shared while pregnancy, I was surprised. I understood, but like I didn't really understand until I was in it. And then, but I was like, oh, I'll be able to eat sushi again, and I'll be able to like eat all these things I haven't been able to, like sandwiches because of the lunch meat. Like I'm going to eat all of the things. I was so excited. But there's still the being conscious. I have to make sure I eat enough carbs because I'm breastfeeding. I need to make sure I drink way more water than I want to because I'm breastfeeding. I have to make sure that I'm doing this and that because I have to be awake and ready for my baby. Like it's just I was done. I was tired of sharing. I did not want to share my body anymore. I was like, 9 months is enough. Like, I want my body back. I was so frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was so fr I also part of my identity, how independent I am, and the fact that I was not an individual anymore really frustrated me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another, I mean, I don't know if actually if that was a reason, but I also, when we were talking about how much time we need to go back to before we go back to work, and you mentioned how like you had gotten to a place with your son by the time you ended up getting back. It took me a long time to actually bond with
Mm-hmm.
Leo. I loved him from the beginning. I cared about him a lot. He was the only being I cared about, but I still felt disconnected from him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I want to say it wasn't until like 6 months in
Mm-hmm.
where I really felt like really attached to him.
Mm-hmm.
And it took about that long, if not maybe 8 months, for me to actually enjoy breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the beginning, I was just bored by it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At times, it felt like a little inconvenient. I was like, oh, I have to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he ate so much. um, and then I feel bad because like I was like, I want to be engaged. So I want to be like, I want him to look, I want to look at him and he can look
Mm-hmm.
at me. And like, I don't want to, maybe I was just too paranoid. I was also like, I have to be conscious of what thoughts I have because if I have negative thoughts, he'll feel them
Mm-hmm.
and then he'll have
Mm-hmm.
negativity. And
Mm-hmm.
even my thoughts were not my own. Like, even my thoughts, I was like, I had to have good thoughts for this baby.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I was just like, because I was so like that way about it, I was just so bored. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I need this to be done. I need this to be done.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think I would be able to breastfeed as long as I did
Mm-hmm.
for physical reasons and also psychological
Mm-hmm.
reasons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's just like, we need time.
Yeah. Yeah.
This whole thing takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was like another thing. People talked about how hard breastfeeding was, and I just did not understand. I was like, how can it be hard? Like, it's just like your body, and then the baby is there.
Yeah. Babies are
Um,
born with the instinct. I also didn't think how, yeah, I
yeah,
can understand.
yeah. And so that's like that's another thing that I don't think gets, any kind of awareness, in the broader culture is it, and so many people I talked to, had like struggled with it. And again, like part of it is because there was this pressure a couple generations ago to not breastfeed, right? That like it wasn't good, that like
Right.
formula was better. And so now we're having to just like regain this knowledge. I'm still breastfeeding and still struggling with it because, I experienced like a lot of discomfort, like physical discomfort. And so that was my thing was like, I was like, it's like hours of nursing and like I'm in pain, right? There's nothing I
Yeah.
can do because and my mom would be like, "Oh, we'll just give him a bottle." And I'm like, "But if I give him a bottle, then like, so how I saw it was that our bodies were having a conversation, and
Mm,
I didn't understand, like I could not understand that conversation, but
mm,
that is what is happening, right? Is that he like my body's literally like analyzing his saliva to like figure out like what he needs, right? And he's
yeah.
sending signals to my body like this is how much I need. And so I didn't want to interrupt that. And so that was really hard. But I wanted to go back to what you were saying about, feeling bored, right? And there's this he's a doctor and he has really great books. His name is like Gerber Mate. He has this book, The Myth of Normal, and for the most part I really respect like everything that he says, but he had this sort of line where he was like, yeah, like mothers, like they're like looking at their phones while they're breastfeeding when they should be looking at their babies' faces. And I kind of bristled at that because it's like, yes, sometimes you are in a place where like you can just like sit and like, and honestly, like Kieran like wouldn't look at me because of like how my body was being, was it
Hmm.
he kind of like would just kind of stare into like my armpit. So like he would
Yeah.
like never,
Yeah.
he wasn't looking at me and he doesn't really care.
Yeah.
So and also he would just sleep on the breast like immediately, so his eyes were closed like all the time, so there was no like sweet eye contact happening. And so
Yeah.
I really appreciate, my lactation consultant, who I think is on her like third or fourth child at this point, that she was just like, just watch TV, just like do some, like do something that like you would be like that you're okay with the fact that you are just trapped, like so that you don't feel trapped, right? I really appreciated that suggestion because I think it really helped me because as you said, like you don't have your body anymore. Like sometimes, it's like I know the bathroom, but he has decided that he needs to like be feeding
Yes.
forever. And so I'm just like sitting here and then he like falls asleep on top of me and it's like, well, I could try to like hand him to somebody so I could like go take a shower, but then he might wake up and want to feed some more. So let's just give my
Right.
boobs a rest. So it is such a challenge, but I think I'm kind of approaching it also that it was this experience that I think is inherently challenging. There are ways that our society makes it worse that could be better, but that it is something that kind of opens up transformation and new perspectives that I think are really valuable. And so I just wanted to hear from you, like especially kind of being able to now look back and see where what you went through. Um, what is like some of like the wisdom or knowledge or insight that kind of came out of that experience for you?
Mm,
That could
man.
be personal, that could be about the world. I feel like it's, there's so many different things,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it just really emphasized how much we really do need to have a policy on when people go back to work, parental leave. Yeah, so I do think if there are two parents, I also think even if there is not parents, even if it's just you and a family member that is supportive or something like that, I do think it's very important to have a policy around longer parental leave. While I was going to work and all that stuff, I got curious and I started looking at other parental leaves. And I knew about this too, but it hits different after while I was actually going through it. Other countries have a year-long parental leave.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then when they get back to work, it's like part-time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even a full, it's not a like boom, you're back. It's
Mm-hmm.
a transition. It's a
Mm-hmm.
transitory process. And I feel like that is so life changing
Mm-hmm.
and life affirming
Mm-hmm.
that I do think there needs to be a policy on it. The US being as uh I don't know, greedy as it is, I don't know how realistic it would be to have a for the US to adopt a policy like that, but I do think that at the very minimum, absolute baseline should be 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
anything shorter than that is really like is harming.
Mm-hmm.
It's harming the parent, it's harming the worker, and it's harming the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just and I think about people who don't even have a month and a half to go back to, who aren't protected at all, that have to like go back the week of
Mm-hmm.
um postpartum and just like it's so wrong. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the biggest thing. It's just like having experienced it, understanding the depth of the importance of having that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think in an ideal world, a year parental leave would be great, is needed, and then part-time returning because this is the other thing we haven't gotten into is the other thing is once the child is two, you have the opportunity of if you need or if you want, having them go to preschool.
Mm-hmm.
Preschool isn't a whole day thing.
Yes.
It's just a few hours of the day. So you still need childcare for the rest of the day.
Yes.
So yeah, we need to go back part-time because even once your child is at a point where they can go to some kind of school, it's still not a full day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, the system is currently set up in a way where it's not supporting families at all
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And family is just being the parent, like the one parent and the child, right? So um that was a huge thing that we're still also in the process of figuring out because it's like the way I'm going into tangents, the way economy is right now too. It's like we can't afford daycare
Mm-hmm.
and rent.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not doing that. We're only doing daycare. We're
Mm-hmm.
living with my parents right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just not sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way the system's right now is not sustainable.
Yeah. Because and I think this kind of goes into this sort of larger, view of things is that everything is individualized, right? That this like quote unquote problem of childcare is not seen as sort of like a collective responsibility. It's put on you, right? That you have to you have to somehow magically come up with a way to pay. And honestly, and then we also know that childcare workers are underpaid, right? But
Yeah.
then, we're all clearly underpaid that we can't afford to pay for our childcare. Um, and and so that was kind of something, so a couple things, that kind of came up for me was this whole idea of because the other thing is you're like, oh, going back to work, but you are working, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
like taking care of this human being is essential work. Like this is work making the future. This is work healing ancestral trauma. This is work of like deep care for like our time, like timelines. And this is also care for the future because like the choices that you make in taking care of this individual is shaping like the like everybody's
Future.
future, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
And and that like that work is unpaid, but like filling out a spreadsheet is what we get paid for. And then we have to like take that spreadsheet work to like fund um
Yes.
like the real work is absurd. Like it's like the whole
Yeah.
thing is absurd, right? And and going back to what I was saying of like the email versus like holding my, or sometimes it's the
Hmm.
Zoom meeting, right? Because and this is just totally developmentally normal, is that sometimes the primary attachment, that's how the child like regulates their emotions, right? And sometimes he's fine with like somebody else and like can regulate his emotions, but something is going on in his brain, and in that moment, like I'm the only person who can hold him, like nobody else, like all,
Hmm.
and these are all people that he loves and are part of his life and very familiar with. It has to be me, and I need to be able to meet that, right? Because in his, like in the way his brain is working, we want to build these pathways, right, of emotional regulation. And I'm the one that has to help do that, you know,
Yeah.
for his like future mental health. But we're on this Zoom call, and
Yeah.
and so now the Zoom call is like more important than that. And it's
Yeah.
in my mind, it's not, like
It's not. Yeah. It's
yeah.
not.
And
I had a Zoom
so
call. Oh, sorry.
go, no, no, go ahead, go ahead.
Just real quick, I had a Zoom call, and at the company I was at, they were not okay with having cameras off. And this one specific one was a day that Lil was sick, so he couldn't go to daycare. Luckily, my mom was here. She was able to help, but it happens that the Zoom call was right when I needed to breastfeed him.
Hmm.
And so I was like, I can't choose between the two.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I shifted my camera up so that you only got like
Hmm.
my neck and chin while I was breastfeeding her, but you could tell that I was looking at something else.
Hmm.
They didn't like that. They were like,
Hmm.
"Well, we have to know that you're paying attention." And I'm like, "Let me turn off my camera
Hmm.
and I will be able to listen better because then I won't also be worried about you and watching me and like the faces you're making and me trying to read if I'm in trouble or not."
Hmm.
So anyway, but yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
and also like that's really, just I think this is something that I didn't know that I think people should know, is that in order to breastfeed, you need to be relaxed because you need to like have oxytocin flowing. So
In
if
order
you
to make
can't,
more milk in general too, pumping,
yeah,
same.
yeah, because I remember I had this day where, because I would try to like schedule things so that I wasn't on a call, but like I had to be on this call. And I was trying to pump, and like something came up in the call that really stressed me out. So I had like a really bad pumping session. I literally like got off the call, saw how little I'd pumped, and started crying, you know, because and it was because like I couldn't relax. And so like I couldn't pump. And so it was like this way, it feels like this waste. It feels like, I, because I had this whole issue of like not of, like underproducing, so like it would stress me out. Um
Me too.
and yeah, yeah, this people don't understand, like that, like why do we need like this was another thing of like finding lactation rooms, like going on these like epic journeys to figure out like, you know, we had to go to the Academy Museum for like a trip with my interns, and they had a lactation room. It was sort of weird. It was like an offshoot of the bathroom. So it was like, it looked like a bathroom, but it was like this separate section. No chair, like no chair in the room. I'm like, what do you think? Like, what is
What are you
this
supposed to
room?
do? Oh my gosh.
So I had to have them go get a chair and like bring it in there. But yeah, I think just like the lack of understanding of what
Mhm.
like these basic things that you need, and like not understanding the repercussions of like not being able to like pump at like the right time or have the time that you need, or be
Mhm.
comfortable and not stressed out. um yeah, I mean it's
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things is that it feels like it's optional. And I think before I had gone through it, I don't think I understood how non-optional it is.
mhm,
How much these things that we need are required by our bodies, and our
mhm,
bodies are the ones doing it. It's I have no control over this.
mhm,
Um, I can't control that if I'm stressed out, I'll make less milk, and therefore I didn't make a lot of milk for the entire time I was breastfeeding because I was in a very stressful job.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
I can't control how how much my brain was affected by this entire time. So I really wasn't at full capacity when I got back to work. I
mhm,
can't, all of these hormonal things that are happening, whether we like it or not, these are not options.
mhm,
Uh, and that goes into what I feel like that goes into what you were saying with like the creating structures that support this phase of life is an investment in our future.
mhm,
Um, because ideally, right, because not all parents become attached to their children, not all parents are at a place where they can be healthy support systems. So this is all like obviously in an ideal situation. But if healthy parents have systems to like help raise healthy babies, then that will be more likely to create healthier adults.
mhm,
Um, and even for situations where parents aren't necessarily connecting, who are having a hard time, I think part of that postpartum medical care should be having an assigned therapist or counselor
mhm,
so that we can have that support.
mhm,
Um, Something that was really, I felt was, what's it called? Hypocritical of the system is that when I was like, once we got closer to the birth, and then right after the first month or two visits after the birth, they were really emphasizing like, how are you mentally? What are you feeling? Are you okay? Do you feel safe? But at no point in time, they're like, we have a system in place. We have someone that you can like let us connect you to this one specific person so that you don't also have to filter through a whole bunch of people.
mhm,
Um, and I feel like that's also a not non-optional. I feel like that is a requirement that should be
mhm,
met and provided.
mhm. Yeah, because I think also because
So,
they do those screenings, right? Like every time you go to you fill out that stupid form, which like I
right.
just like hate that stupid form that they make you fill out. Though I do remember like when I went to my OB's office, he was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of seeing some like some like your like my score wasn't very good because I like answered truthfully that day."
Yeah,
And like
yeah.
so he was like the only person who was like, "Oh, like are you okay? Like, do we need to get you on medication?" And I'm like, "No, I have my therapist. I'm fine." But I think that is like the thing is that they want you to fill out this form so they can just like give you some medication, right? Which is not
Mhm.
really what, some people, I don't want to say that like some people don't need it, but that's really not like it's not really that I need medication, it's that I need help. Right?
Yeah, it's a
You
band-aid.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of my friends that I met through like the birthing class became a doula, and there's this idea of having like a postpartum doula, which now that I know that that's a
Mm.
thing, I was like, that's actually the thing that I needed, right? Was like the postpartum doula to come in and, she just for whatever reason was, very on top. So like one day, like she came over and like brought some food that she had prepped. her
Oh my
baby is like
God.
literally the same age as like they were born the same day.
Oh my
And she
gosh.
like
Oh wow.
and she like came over, and she was just like way more functioning than I was at that time. Because like everybody is different and like functions differently.
And she might
But
have had that support that she's providing you. She might have also had on her side.
yeah,
So
yeah.
like,
I mean, she did have like a postpartum doula, and so I think that was why she was able to like bring that was because she had like the postpartum doula
mhm.
come, and I think that they can help with meal prep. That's like one of the things that they can do. There are all of these supports that are missing. I think a lot of what I see now that I'm engaging more in these just online spaces, is people talking about how in communities that are more built to support is that you have your aunts and your cousins and your sisters and like everybody shows up to help right when that transition time happens so that you really can just be laying in bed with your baby for a month, and then the next month you're like getting up and walking around a little bit, and that you get. And I can't remember, there's like cultures where I can't remember what the time period is, if it's like 3 months or 6 months, that like the baby's feet like don't touch like the baby doesn't touch the ground, like literally somebody is holding the
Mm,
baby like 24/7. And and then and that's what. And I think that's the other thing is that that babies come into the world with an operating system that's from like 500,000 years ago or whenever like human beings became human beings.
yeah.
So their operating system isn't like, oh, I'm gonna like sleep in this crib or like lie in this bassinet. Their operating system is, I'm safe when someone is holding me, and if someone's not holding me, I'm in danger. Like the end,
Yeah.
right? Like just like how
Yeah.
they work. Yeah, and
Yeah.
our culture is not set up to support that, and then it kind of falls on like one person, right, to make up that difference, which is
Yeah.
very unfair.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, I think even more recent, I think it's just what the last two generations where if it's a dual home where both people have to work, or maybe it's just the first generation. No, I think Gen X too, where we're like it's not really an option for everybody to have one person stay at home, where maybe three or four generations ago it was one person was always home if it was a dual household. So I think it's evolutionary wise, babies are not in a place, like you said, exactly to the point. Babies are not in a place where they are feel safe if they're, in a crib for most of the time, or they're like one of six babies and there's only three, caretakers to take care of all of those babies.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it's yeah, evolutionary wise, it's like we are working against
Hmm.
our humanity.
Yeah. But even like the idea that like there's one person at home, like that's still too much, right? Like that idea that like 50s like suburban ideal of like
Yes.
dad goes to work and mom stays home. Like that's too much work for mom,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because like
Yeah.
before it was like people were in villages, right? And so no one went anywhere to work. Like your work was where you were at, right? So, if men, if like the culture had different jobs for men and women, like the men were still around, right? And like they were, and this is actually a different book that I there's some issues, right, with it because it's sort of this white woman like giving us all this knowledge of like indigenous people. But
Oh.
there's this white woman. It's called Hunt Gather Parent, and it's this white woman, and she like went around to these three different sort of communities that are living more in alignment with how their ancestors lived, kind of, and obviously like they're not like stuck in this bubble, but that like they're still connected to those ancestral practices. And one of the things that she says that she kind of noticed like in the community is that there's this sort of like invisible like net of protection, so that, she would notice like here's this like 3-year-old just sort of like wandering around, and you're like, who's watching that 3-year-old? And it's that everybody is watching that
Hmm.
3-year-old. Like every single person has an eye on that child, including other children. So there's this sense, like the children have the sense of autonomy, but there are like the entire community is caring for
Yeah.
them at the same time. And so that way, that, she was saying, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it like really shocked me, like that by like, 6 months, the amount of time that the mother spent with the child was a lot lower than how much time I had to spend with my child,
Mm.
because it was just that like there were other people around, that like
Yeah.
7-year-olds are like baby wearing, because that's just how the society works. That it is this, they distribute the labor. Um,
Hmm.
and it kind of got me thinking, and I think this has been mentioned in some other books that I've read, that, there's an art, like there was this earlier argument that human society sort of built up so that like we could sort of hunt in packs, right? And that's how like human
Mm.
communication. But then there's this other argument that actually human society developed because we need to take care of babies because they're so hard to take care of,
Oh.
that you actually, and there's another book, The Carpenter and the Gardener, where she
Hmm.
talks about how, for instance, like chimpanzees, like once they reach like the females reach an age where they can't reproduce, they die. But in our culture, you become a grandmother. Like human females live way past their reproductive years. And that's like an evolutionary response to the fact that babies are really difficult to take care of because they
Yes.
are not as autonomous as like another animal that gets born and can like run around within a couple hours,
Yes.
um, that because
That
it's so
actually
labor
makes a lot of
intensive.
sense.
Yeah, that because it's so
Yeah.
labor intensive, like from an evolution standpoint, like we've changed, and then we built up these ideas of having like cooperative societies, and we're way more cooperative than, a lot of like, chimpanzees, like bonobos you can make an argument about, but like we are generally more cooperative than primates. So why is that? Is it because we needed to
Hmm.
like hunt woolly mammoths, or was it because babies are really hard to take care of? Because it like we can
Yeah.
survive like not hunting woolly mammoths, but you can't survive like without taking care of babies. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think about like the society and how much it has shifted away from like the roots of like why we have a society, which is the sort of idea of interdependence and cooperation, and this obsession with individualism that you see like in these structures, but then you also see in even like the idea that, you have to teach the baby to sleep in a crib by itself because
Yes.
it needs to be independent. And it's like that's like a form of indoctrination, I just like
Yeah.
don't want to, like participate in. And it was just shocking. It was just shocking to me how, it's like how it has been infused in that people accept it so easily, right? And how
Hmm.
it gets perpetuated, that my like I have when I go to the pediatrician's office, one of the questions that I'm supposed to answer is, does the baby sleep in a crib by himself all night? Like that, like last time I was there for the 18 months. And I just don't answer the
Oh,
question. Like I just like don't answer. But why like
okay. That
like
cannot be that's something that makes me so mad. That cannot be standardized. There is no way to standardize that.
yeah,
Not only because like we need like babies do need touch and they do need, all of these things. And also every baby is so different
right.
that you cannot standardize that.
Hmm.
Sorry. That
Yeah,
makes me,
no,
it
like
annoys
like
me.
those again, the pediatrician checklists are the thing like
Mhm.
endlessly make me angry, but in particular like around like sleep and how the baby is supposed to be sleeping. And
Mhm.
and it's not and it's not even research supported, right? It's it is like a cultural bias that has been institutionalized through like very specific research parameters, but is not really modeled on like normal infant sleep. It's modeled on this idea of like, oh, bed sharing isn't safe and the baby should be sleeping through the night, because like you just sleep train and then like the baby can do that,
I
And
think it's also driven by like the baby should be sleeping through the night because you should be sleeping through the night because we need you to get back to work. I do think that there
exactly.
is that level
Yeah.
of like the baby should be fine, so you should be fine, so everything should be fine. It's like
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in one of the books that I mentioned, I think it was Hunk Out of the Parent, she said that even the idea that people sleep like for straight 8 hours is like a invention of like adults, that's an invention of the Industrial Revolution, and that actually it was quite common in even like European societies that sometimes people would like wake up in the middle of the night and they would either like say their prayers or they would like write something or they would like like she said, like they would raid somebody's apple orchard, get into trouble, like that,
Get a
like
snack.
people would do things, and that in other cultures, someone might get up and a couple people might get up and like go hang around, build up the fire a little bit and like tell some more stories and then go back to sleep. And then if you were tired during the day, you just took a nap, like this
Yeah.
idea that, there's like this block of time where it's like, this is when you sleep and this is when you work. Like that
Hmm.
regimented is like turning us into, is trying to turn us into machines, right? To fit into this
Yes.
sort of like industrial, way of thinking. And yeah, just
Yeah.
again, like how how much, and I think that was another thing that has just been continually highlighted for me because I'm seeing how often I'm asked to ignore my child's needs and what his body is telling him is true, is how much I am and have been not listening to my body and what my body is telling me is true, and how easily I would prioritize everything above what my body was telling me. And I think something else, and this is a tangent, but I feel like in the early days of the pandemic, so many people were talking about like, oh, this pandemic is a portal and we're all like we're
Oh,
seeing, like the health disparities and like how like, we've been like our priorities are all wrong. And then it was like a couple months later, it was like, oh, we all understand racism now and like we see the problem and like we're here, we're like ready to like do the work. And I look around now and like everyone has just not only gone back to the way things were before, in some ways, like it's even worse, you know?
yeah.
And I think that is like this like fundamental way that I feel like so disconnected from my work, from like what I'm doing, from like the society at large, is I took those lessons from like early 2020 like really seriously, and this process of becoming a mother, being a parent, has really like solidified like those truths and deepened those realizations. And so it's like I can't like go into like reset mode of like going back to where things are. And so that's been like a real struggle for me, is like how do I, and that's why I loved like in the introduction that you gave me to read, that you're like crossing this bridge and learning about your new self. And I really identify with, I think for me, I feel like I think I've always like not known who I was. And so like I've always been like trying to figure that out for like many years. But to me, I think what's I'm really struggling with is like, how do I function? Like, how do I like sit at this like fulcrum between like how things are and how things should be? I think that's what I'm like trying to figure out right now.
Yeah, it's almost more hurtful going from from what you were saying about what the lessons, quote unquote, the lessons society had learned during COVID, and it's a little bit more hurtful that we know what is better and right, and we are still getting pressure that says, well, profit is still more important.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
we know and we learned and we saw that it's possible, but profit is more important. So we need
Yeah.
to not do that. And that goes into, I think that goes into like what you're experiencing, what we're experiencing. We're like, we know these are the things that we need, and we don't feel like we can afford to do that for multiple
Mhm.
reasons. Literally afford and figuratively afford. But yeah, I mean, part of the struggle of consistently choosing the things that we know is not right. Going against what our bodies are telling us, what our babies are telling our bodies, that, all those things. I think that's one of the big reasons why I have this year, I feel like specifically these last 6 months, I've came to realize that I feel the most disconnected to my intuition that I have my entire life.
Mm.
And I do think that is something I'm trying to figure out how to rebuild. And I do feel like I have started rebuilding, but it's like nowhere near what it
Mm.
was before. And so that's part of the learning who I am, like being on this bridge is physically learning that, and accepting that my body is just different and it's never going to be what it was before physically, like sleep wise, also energy wise, psychologically. It's accepting what it is now and learning what it is now, and also trying to figure out, I think something that I in my head I would love to create, but also I'm like, am I the right person to do that? I think that something that I could have really used is anytime postpartum, like anytime between when I had Leo now, maybe even while I was pregnant, is having a system where I can mourn who I was
Mhm.
post
Mhm.
baby, I mean, pre
Mhm.
baby, who I was,
Mhm.
and figure out what pieces of that will serve me and strengthen me into
Mm.
who I am becoming. Um, because I do think I try not to say my new self or my new, because I don't think it's a new. I don't think it's a
Mhm.
binary where it's old and new. I think it's just the changing, the self I have been, the core I've always been, and with differences. And
Mhm.
some differences are like, after being pregnant, I like chocolate now, and I didn't like chocolate before. And
That's so
so
funny.
that's new. You know what I mean? Like, little new things like that, where it's like, because I was pregnant and because of postpartum, now this. So things that were out of my, what I think is control. And also just like, I have all of this experience and wealth of knowledge and like strength of being like, I know better now. How do I use that to move myself forward into my existence?
Mhm.
Um, and so part of that is like, I've acknowledged that I lost some of my really deep, my voice, my internal voice, my intuition, but not lost, just like buried it with
Mhm.
societal expectations. And so it's
Mhm.
like, what can I do to uncover that so that I
Mhm.
can surface that again and have
Mhm.
that be my loud driving force?
Mm. Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I've also felt lost most of my life, but this feels less lost. Before pregnancy, I felt very lost for like 2 years. And then like it was really just like I felt wandering through the world. And now it feels like less of a lost, aimless wandering and more of just like this rerouting. I don't know.
Mm.
It feels
Mhm.
different. It
Mhm.
feels more empowered,
Mhm.
but there's still that journey that needs to happen.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sitting with, and I think that that's so true that all of the decisions and the actions that you've had to take in order to just, survive day to day, and how that has disconnected you from, your intuition. I think this is kind of getting into like, more like esoteric, but I think about the, maybe like the intentionality of these structures, that
Mm.
there's this beneath the greed and the need for power is this mechanism that almost feels purposeful in its severing of our connection to our intuition. Because I can imagine this transition as being this place for birthing people to connect with this deep power of intuition, right? To like deepen,
Yes.
like I because as I said, like I feel like I am noticing more, right? Like I'm feeling like I can see like the interruptions more, right? And I feel like if I can see them, like there's the opportunity like to heal that, right? And I have been able to give myself so much more compassion throughout my whole life, because I now have this sort of infinite compassion for this other being. And I can see this as this incredibly this place of just of like powering up, of like becoming incredibly powerful. And that it's almost like the structure is there to undermine that at like the most deep level, so that I can't do that. And so I think
Yeah.
that's what I was kind of saying about like this, like I'm like vibrating between these two things, because I think there's like this deeper part of myself that wants to do that leveling up, and I feel like I don't have space to do it in my life, and I don't know how to I don't know how to deal with that. um
I don't know either.
yeah, and I think, like I don't know if I kind of feel angry about it. I don't know if like you feel angry about it, but I feel like
Yeah.
that's like a strong message, right? That we we are still connected to that intuition and that deeper knowledge and that truth. And I think hopefully both of us, are on that path to like figure out, how to how to do what we know that we need to do in this space that isn't giving us the space that we need.
Yeah. Yeah. as long as we can, I feel like as long as we can continue to feel the urge and have somewhat like enough space or ability or capacity to do small actions towards it. Basically, as long as we don't abandon it, I feel like we can get there. It will, you know, what is timeline? It might take us like 20 years. I don't know. And that's another thing I'm learning. Like, I'm, uh, time, and you mentioned this too before that, like, I don't know if it's because like babies teach us to that time is subjective. Um, but I used to be like, I need to figure out this now. I need to get to where I need to be in like the next 5 years. Like I need to figure, I need to make this money now. Now I'm just like, I don't know how long it's gonna take, but
Mm,
as long as I continue in that direction, it'll happen. Like it'll
mm,
get there. So yeah, I feel like relieved by that and also, I don't know, like the societal me is like, oh, still trying to do it faster, but the other part of me is like, it's gonna happen,
mm,
you know.
mhm.
just gotta manage my own expectations too around that. I think something that's been very helpful to me is I did end up feeling empowered enough, and also the opportunity of moving back to my parents' house gave me the safety I felt like I needed to quit that other job. And I got a part-time job.
Hmm.
And and I knew that was because like I had hit a limit of like knowing that all of this was I was going through was wrong. And what needed to do was work less. Ideally not work at all, but we're
Hmm.
not in that level. And then like doing what I knew was right, even though would come with like struggle. And so quitting that job, getting this part-time job was like healed me
Mm.
so much because I was becoming a different person than my core. I was way more negative. I was way more on edge. I had absolutely no energy at all. I felt like I was not I was losing the parent I knew I was to Leo and was becoming someone different. And just that one switch of changing the job to something that was way less stressful in the society terms than what I was trying to pursue with that corporate job was like getting to a career that would make me more money so then I could provide more down the
Hmm.
road. Went back to like what I've been doing for like 10 years that I didn't want to do anymore because I need to keep growing and I need to get there. I went back to that, took what I consider is a very easy job, consciously making the choice like I am prioritizing to have as much energy as I have onto Leo, to be that parent I know I am, and to have that balance that we all need. And that is what fixed me.
Hmm.
And but I think
Hmm.
that was acting on the intuition, that was acting on the knowledge that we've gained during this time.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and now this last week I'm back full time, but I'm feeling okay about it because Leo's older, because we're all sleeping better, because we and the job is still a very low energy job where I have most of it to be with me
Hmm.
the rest of the day. And even
Hmm.
at like if something comes up with Leo, I can take care of that. They're so flexible.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm feeling okay about that, but not ideal, but okay. I think those little things, reminding myself like I am acting on it, even if
Hmm.
it's one decision a month, even if it's one decision every 6 months, like I am working towards
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
And as long as I don't abandon it,
Yeah.
we'll still
Yeah,
be
and
there.
it seems like this has also hopefully created space for your creativity. You're working on this
Yes,
project
it
with your
did.
sister, you're
Hmm.
reconnecting with Swarm, and like that's like such an amazing community. So it sounds like you've kind of returned to your values, which are not like, like the Enid I know is not corporate values, Enid. Like the
Yes,
Enid I know
it's not.
is uh like places the value elsewhere. And it seems like that's what's you're returning to.
Yeah.
And that is something, trying to like kind of reach some kind of endpoint to our conversation, I think could go forever, is that I have also been kind of trying to return to my creativity and figure out different ways to make that sustainable. So, like, this podcast is like one of those things, and Revolution
Yes.
Dress is one of those things. So, I think, you know, much unknowns, in the future,
Yes.
but I do want to celebrate, that in addition to creating a human and caring for them and hopefully making making a better society through that care, we're also honoring our creativity. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to say
Yeah.
to end the
Um,
conversation.
yeah. I think I maybe just acknowledge and appreciate you because I feel like when we were going through postpartum and everything, you were very intentional about still keeping a sense of identity, a sense of self outside of the baby. And that was just really inspiring because I don't see that kind of prioritization in
Hmm.
parents. Um, and honestly, that's something that helped me be able to move towards getting back to writing, getting back to Swarm is that I really need to maintain that. And so, yeah, I just want to appreciate you because you do inspire me and like
Aw.
also give me this grounding of like this is possible, this world exists, and I can do it. So I just appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And hopefully, if there's anybody who's listening to this in the future, that they also connect to what we've been saying and yeah, the world that I think we want to make through our work as mothers and creative people.
Yeah, other worlds are possible and they can exist.